has been in effect.
I'm sorry, Susan.
That's all right. Has been in existence since November of 1996. And as we go on, I'm going to have Sergio switch my slides for me. So we're going to go on to the presenters. Sergio.
Yes, I'm trying to do just that. Sergio.
Okay. All right. Now, as again, my name is Susan Johnson, and our manager is Andrew Von Single, who took over as the manager of the SPEC office. SPEC stands for Stakeholders, Partnerships, Education, and Communication. And we're what we say the good guys in the Internal Revenue Service. I know some people we have a reputation, and we go out to encourage people and assist them in preparing their tax returns, resolving issues that we can. And normally in this presentation, we also have another, consultant, Delia Romano. Unfortunately, she was not able to attend today. So we're going to start off with the next slide here. And it just tells you an introduction. And the introduction is that the Internal Revenue Code was revised in, I want to say, 1995. The Internal Revenue Code 6109 created a process for the Internal Revenue Service to introduce what is called the IRS Individual Tax Identification Number to individuals who they have to have a tax ID number for federal tax purposes, but who do not qualify for a Social Security number. So if the person has a federal tax obligation and they do not qualify for a Social Security number, then the ITIN is awarded. As far as the regulation, as far as who's eligible for a Social Security number, unfortunately, I do not have all that information. They do have their own website, and the application I know is an SS5. As we continue on here, we have the objectives of this. This is kind of like a class, and we're going to define the ITIN and explain its purpose, determine who needs an ITIN, identify and explain the special rules that apply to dependents and spouses, and we're going to distinguish between an acceptance agent and a certified acceptance agent. Those are kind of like helpers that assist taxpayers in getting their ITIN. They've gone through some training with the IRS. On our next slide, we talk about, we're going to determine where to submit the Form W-7, and the W-7 also comes in a W-7-SP. You can also determine what documentation is needed to be attached to the ITIN application. Next item we're going to talk about is determine how a tax return should be prepared when a taxpayer has an ITIN SSN mismatch using the software, certain software that the taxpayers can use to prepare their returns. And we're going to identify resources for more information. As we continue to the next slide, we're going to have what is an ITIN? Okay, ITIN is a tax processing number issued by the Internal Revenue Service for certain residents and non-resident status, aliens, their spouses, and their dependents. Valid ITIN are 9-digit numbers, and it's in the same format as the Social Security number. It begins with a 9. The middle ones, which is the 4th and the 5th digits, vary between 50 to 65, 70 to 88, 90 to 92, and 94 to 99. Individual tax identification numbers that haven't been included on a U.S. federal tax return for at least once in a 3 in the last 3 consecutive years will expire. At this time, all ITINs that have been issued have been considered expired if that meets that criteria. And we'll talk about what happens when it expires. The particular client can go get it renewed, and there's a process for that to be done as well. As we continue on, we have what the purpose of an ITIN is. ITINs are IRS assigned numbers used only for federal tax purposes. An ITIN does not grant entitlement to Social Security benefits. It does not change the immigrant status or the right to work in the US. It is just for federal tax purposes only. ITINs provide a means to efficiently process and account for tax returns and payments for those who are not eligible for a Social Security number. Meaning that we need a number to process those tax returns. And that is what the ITIN is assigned for. The ITIN also assists the IRS with the collection of taxes from foreign nationals, non-resident aliens, and others who have filing or payment obligations under the US tax law. As we continue on, the purpose of ITINs continue. ITINs do not, and they're going to keep emphasizing this, entitle the recipient for Social Security benefits, or it's a replacement for a Social Security card. It does not qualify applicants for all tax credits. It does not change their immigration status. It does not give them a right to work, and it does not serve as an identification outside the federal tax system. And that one is very important. A lot of people think because they have an ITIN that gives them the ability to, one, go get a driver's license, to get a state ID. It does not. It is just particularly only for federal tax purposes. It has no jurisdiction in any place else. As we continue on, we're going to go to the next slide. Okay, who needs an ITIN? An individual who's not eligible for a Social Security number, but who must furnish a taxpayer identification number for US tax purposes or to file a federal tax return. If they have to file a tax return or they have to submit it for US tax purposes. And you probably say, well, what's the difference? Well, some people want to establish some type of bank account in the United States. They might not necessarily have a filing requirement, but they can apply for the ITIN number to establish a bank account, to set up a business in the United States. Those are what we call exception rules. And there is a publication, 1915, that is available, and it discusses the exception rules and what documentation that the IRS needs from you. We also, in this publication, discuss the requirements to get an ITIN and the documentation that is needed as well. Also, the Form W7 and the Form W7 ENSP has instructions, and it discusses the same information. As we continue on to the next slide, here are some examples of people who need an ITIN. A non-resident alien individual claiming reduced withholding under an applicable income tax treaty for which an ITIN is required. A non-resident alien individual not eligible for a Social Security number who is required to file a US federal tax return, or who's filing a tax return only to claim a refund. A non-resident alien not eligible for SSN who elects to file a joint US tax return with a spouse who's a US resident or US citizen. That's sometimes we often find a lot of that, and we welcome, the applications. Okay. Another example is a non-resident alien student, a professor or a researcher who is required to file a U.S. federal tax return, but who isn't eligible for an SSN and who's claiming an exception to the tax return filing requirement. Another example is a spouse of an alien or a dependent claimed as an exemption on a U.S. federal tax return who isn't eligible to get a social security number. Then you have a U.S. resident alien who files a U.S. federal tax return, but who isn't eligible for a social security number. Those terms of resident alien and non-resident alien depends on various things. For example, how you came into the country of the United States. A lot of people come in with their visas, and then we have people who come in other ways, and they could possibly be considered a resident alien for tax purposes only, depending on how long they've been here. As we continue on who needs a ITIN, another example is a dependent or a spouse of a non-resident alien who holds a U.S. visa and who isn't eligible for a social security number. They gave you some little wording here, and that's related to a tax law. Congress passed a law in December of 2017 that said we're not giving out personal exemptions. Normally you could get a personal exemption. So between the years of 2018 until 2025, no one is entitled to this personal exemption. So what they were saying here is that in order for the person to be listed to get a credit, they have to be listed on the tax return. Okay. This information does not impact people who are holding under reason codes F on the application, the W-7, and their dependents. F on the W-7 is a non-resident alien who's a student, a professor, or a researcher. So it's just some changes as far as the tax law. As we continue on, okay, there are some tax benefits, even though they have an ITIN. Okay, an allowable tax benefit includes the spouse filing a joint return, the status of head of household, the American Opportunities Credit, which is when you're going to school, it's the first 4 years of post-secondary, the premium tax credit for health insurance, the child and dependent care credit, or the credit for other dependents, meaning that the person holding the ITIN could be eligible for some of these. The head of household is a filing status where an ITIN applicant who is a qualifying child or a relative other than your parents who live with you for more than half the year and meet certain tests. Or a parent may be a qualifying person for head of household. That's dealing with the tax law, so they refer you to publication 501. The American Opportunities Credit is if the Form W-7 is submitted to claim the American Opportunities Credit. It's called the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Then they are expecting that tax return has a Form 8863 with it, which is the credit for higher education. And then that refers you to a publication 970 on education. Then we have the premium tax credit. Those are for people who are able to buy their health insurance on the marketplace. And if they submit that in to obtain that credit, then we expect to see the Form 1095A. and the form 8916, excuse me, 8962. And that's going to be required on that application. And for further information, we refer to publication 974. As we continue on, we talk about the child and dependent care credit. This is for people who need someone to provide child and dependent care to allow them to work. Otherwise, you might say babysitters, daycare centers. If this application comes in with the ITIN, they're expecting to see the form 2441 showing that who is the qualifying person. Information concerning that credit is located in publication 503. Then there's a credit for other dependents. That's if the form W7 is submitted to claim the other dependent credit. It's just a credit. It's not refundable. They're expecting to see information attached on a 1040 form with the box check credit for other dependents box. And that is when you have a dependent, they have to be your qualifying children or residents who are U.S. residents or U.S. nationals. The publication, excuse me, not the publication, you would need to attach the form 8812 and for more information. Again, that's just a credit. It does not refund to you. What it does is to reduce your taxes. As we continue on, okay, we're gonna have a little math right here. And I spoke about a party who have come to the United States and they don't necessarily have a visa or anything to that matter. But based on how long they've been in the country, they can meet what we call resident alien for tax purposes. And that grants them the ability to file a regular 1040 tax return. And what makes that so is what we call the substantial presence test. Okay, and I'm not sure if you heard about this. It's like, I've been here 183 days this year. Okay, well, the way the law works is they have to have 31 days inside the United States during the current year and 183 days during a 3-year period that includes the current year and the 2 years immediately before that. So you start counting this way. All the days you were present in the current year, 1/3 of the days you were present in the first year before the current year, and 1/6 of the days you were present in the second year before the current year. So we're looking at, it's called a 3-year look back period. To keep this, I believe in keeping it simple. If I have a party who came into the United States on January 1, 2023, and has not left the country and is planning to stay here all 365 days, they will be considered a U.S. resident for tax purposes only. If they stayed here 6 months, that's 180 days, they don't meet it. If they stayed here, if they came into the country in 2021 and stayed 6 months, and then in 2022 they stayed 6 months, and in this year they stayed 6 months, they meet it. So often we will ask, how long have you been in the country? Information to those purposes. It's not I got you or anything like that. That's just determined. There are advantages of being treated as a resident alien for tax purposes as opposed to being a non-resident alien. The resident is treated as if they were considered a U.S. citizen on that tax return. For a couple of exceptions, because they have an ITIN, they wouldn't be eligible for certain credits. The one that sticks out is the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. And those two both are refundable.
Susan, I'm sorry
Yes.
to interrupt you. I would like to pause for a little bit because we have some questions, or do you prefer
Okay.
to answer those questions at the end?
No, we can talk now. Sure.
Okay, I know Pastor Fakiri asked a question, so please go ahead, Pastor. Can you share with us your question?
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello, my question is concerning the ITN number.
Yes.
And my question was how someone can file the taxes while he's not eligible to work here in the United States. So where is going to get the income for him to file the tax? That was my question.
When you say where is he going to get the income?
Yes, because he's not eligible to work.
Okay, unfortunately, the standpoint of the Internal Revenue Service is there are people various ways they can work in the United States. It's not necessarily what I would say the procedure is the right way, but people do still work. And unfortunately, the Internal Revenue Service standpoint is that we want you to file that tax return. And yes, they could, as indicated, I see Joanna's jumped in, and they're unfortunately not, they're undocumented. But the Internal Revenue Service's standpoint is that we're not USCIS, the immigration standpoint. That's not our job. So we just want them to report their income. And yes, there are people who do work and are not necessarily to. So, or a lot of people could be what is considered self-employed. So they don't necessarily have a reporting, like, I have a job that, does, working for the Internal Revenue Service, but there are a lot of people who do a lot of jobs that are considered self-employed income. One that sticks in my mind is been occurring that I see a lot of is the digital economy. So I'm not sure of all the regulations as far as how to being working at DoorDash and things like that, but they can work.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
I believe
That's a very good question. Yes.
Thank you.
I believe Olanike has a question too, or a
Sure.
comment.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
So my question is concerning the substantial presence. So I asked, does it have to be the kind of presence that is documented or undocumented? So for the documented, let's say someone that came in on a visiting visa and they overstay. Let's say they overstay, but they have been present in the United States for over 6 months or maybe a year or two. Or so would that count as a substantial presence that they can file?
That substantial presence just determines what your status is. If they're now, first of all, we have to keep in mind, are they working in the United States even though they're holding that B1 visa? Because B is for visitors. And yes, a lot of people do overstay, but the IRS is not looking at documentation for that. They're going by, I hate to say it, physically. Did you leave? But it's not, doesn't have to be documented with that visa. And yes, There are people who do overstay their visa. But the IRS doesn't look at, okay, we'll ask, Miss So-and-so, how long you been in the United States? They'll say, well, I've been here since January of 2017. You know, I came over to visit, I liked it. Okay. If she hasn't gone anywhere, she meets the substantial presence test. So if she's working or doing something that requires her to file a tax return, she is considered a resident alien for tax purposes only. It does not move up her visa status. It does not change anything as far as her eligibility for anything else, but it just allows her to be treated as a U.S. citizen. U.S. resident, I'm sorry, not a citizen. Did I answer the question?
I have a question, please.
Sure.
Okay, so from what you said, what you're saying is if someone has kind of overstayed, say like 3 years, and the person has like 4 kids, the person can, using the ITIN, the person can file tax and get a refund even on the kids. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. No.
Okay.
What I was saying is that if they have a filing requirement, meaning they have earned income, or they have some income that requires them to file a U.S. federal tax return, and if they have 4 children, now if the children are born in the United States, they're U.S. citizens. But if they came in with that party, he or she could be eligible to get ITINs for everybody. And if she worked, then yes, she can file a tax return. That necessarily means she's getting a refund. Okay. The way you get a refund is that the amount of taxes that you owe and the amount of credits that you have available that you're eligible for is greater than the amount of tax you owe. That reduces, it gives you a refund. But unfortunately, when it comes to parties who have an ITIN, none of those, unless they paid into the United States government from federal income tax withheld, they will not get a refund. We can reduce their tax liability. Like, for example, when you apply for the credit for the daycare, it gives you a percentage off the taxes that you owe to the government. Last year, the IRS made a one-time deal. They made that credit refundable only for 1 year, and then they stopped it and put it back as just to reduce your tax. So it's not necessarily that you will get a refund because you overstayed your welcome.
Thank you for clarifying.
Oh, you are certainly welcome. Thank you for your question, and it was a very good question.
Okay, then we can continue with the presentation. Please hold your questions for later, guys. We will address them as we move on.
Okay. Here we have the next one is after substantial presence. Rules for dependents. Only residents of the following countries may be able to claim an exemption or related credit for their dependents on the U.S. federal income tax return: the United States, Canada, India, Mexico, and the Republic of Korea, which is known as South Korea. This exemption amount for all taxpayers is 0, starting with the years that I talked about, January 2018 through 2025. However, if the taxpayer with qualifying dependents who live with them in the U.S. may qualify for the credit for other dependents. And that's going back to it's not refundable. So it's $500 per person, but it's not refundable.
Susan, you are muted. Let me unmute you.
Work in the US because for a social security number, permanent legal residents of the United States. They used to call this a green card. It is not green anymore. It varies from beige to pink. They constantly change it. But it's called a permanent resident card. An individual with a valid social security number, an applicant not meeting the criteria for residency and/or ID documentation. Those are the people who fail to prove identity and foreign status. Meaning that they could apply for an ITIN, but if you didn't prove it, then you wouldn't get it. Okay. We broke for questions, but is there anything else burning right now? Did someone want it?
Yes, I believe Joanna had a question.
Hi, Joanna.
Hey, Susan.
Hello.
So I think I've asked you this before, and your response was to call the customer service, but you know how that is. So I wanted to know, how can somebody get their renew their ITIN if they forgot their number and they lost the paper that has the number on it? How can they renew their like, what are their options for renewing their ITIN without the actual ITIN number?
Well, the procedure now is that when they apply for a renewal, the renewal requires now that they must do a tax return.
Mm-hmm.
W-7. So they need to either request, if they don't have, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is they don't know their social, they don't, excuse me, not social, they don't know their
ITIN. Yeah.
They don't know it.
Yeah, they haven't been able to file because they don't know it.
Okay. Then the other option is that they either have to come in and schedule an appointment in a walk-in facility.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can call the toll-free line. They're going to ask them some questions to verify who they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that telephone number is the 1-800-829-1040.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can call the request for an appointment line.
Mm-hmm.
and request an appointment.
Okay.
And that telephone number is 1-844-545-5640.
Thank you, Susan.
Another reminder is neither one of those you should not call on Monday morning. Monday is an extremely busy day within the Internal Revenue Service. I suggest you call Tuesday through Friday, and call early in the morning. Now, with that situation, Joanna, you spoke of, on May 13th, the Indianapolis office of the Internal Revenue Service will be open that Saturday between the hours of 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you don't need an appointment on that day. They have what they call Saturday services. And across the country, IRS has been open on Saturdays. Like, for example, the first one was in February. There's one going on today, but the one in Indianapolis is not open. It will only be open on May 13th. So if they can hold out until May 13th, they can assist them in there at that situation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, please. Hi,
Sure.
Susan. My name is Nora.
Hi, Nora.
I just want to make sure I got this right. An ITIN's holder can set up an account in the bank.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes, they apply for a app. They got to do it. It's kind of like they go to the bank and tell them they want to set up an account, and the bank has to provide them a letter to say that this person is setting up an account at the bank, and it has to be on the bank's letterhead, and they submit that along with their application to the Internal Revenue Service. And actually in the publication 1915, they give you an example of the letter, what we need. But yes, they are eligible to set up a bank account.
But they're not allowed for any loans like credit cards or car loans or.
I am not sure on that. I know they can use it for mortgages. So,
I mean, do they have like credit scores here in the country, or they can't build their credit score since they don't have a social security number?
I am not sure on that one. I'm sorry. I'm not sure on that one.
You can actually you can build credit with your ITIN. And
Okay.
it's because a lot of people buy houses with ITIN, and you have to have credit to be able to buy a house when you're getting it through a bank. And there's some banks that do accept the ITIN. So yes, you can build your credit with your ITIN, and then if you were to ever get a social security number in the future, you could actually transfer your credit from your ITIN to your social security number.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna.
No problem.
Okay.
And I also help people fill out their ITIN application. So if anybody needs help.
Yeah. Okay, here we are at how to apply for ITIN. Okay, each person who requires an ITIN must file a separate application, which is the W-7, and provide supporting documentation that establishes there are two things that you have to establish: your identity and your connection to a foreign country. That means we have to prove that you were born outside the United States. Documentation to be eligible for it. Okay. As we continue on, it talks about how to apply with it. You need to complete the application, a W-7 or a W-7 ENSP. It is your choice to, if you want to do the W-7 or you choose to do the Spanish version of it. Either one will be accepted in a facility of the Internal Revenue Service. Okay. It must be completed and accompanied by the supporting documentation and a U.S. federal tax return. That's normally in certain purposes. There are some exceptions that we don't need the tax return. The one that Nora talked about, the bank account. We don't want a tax return. There are other things that we need from them there. It says that the applicant's name must match the name as it appears on their identifying documents. This is also the name that should be used on the tax return. As it indicates here, sometimes I jump ahead, please forgive me, that it says there are some exceptions to the U.S. federal tax return. If you claim one of these exceptions, then you must submit the documentation required as listed in the instructions of the Form W-7 instead of the tax return. Information here. The Form W-2 wage and tax statement must have the same name that appears on the federal tax return submitted with the Form W-7. Okay, as we continue on, let's talk about the documents substantiating proof of identity and foreign status. They must be original or certified copies from the issuing agency. We do not accept notarized, except in the exception of a military person, but it has to either be an original document or a certified copy from the issuing agency. And they have to approve, they must bear the original, authentic stamp, seal, placed by the issuing agency. Meaning that if you have, say, a copy of your passport, that copy has to be certified by either the consulate, or you request a copy from the particular agency of that government. I put it in an example. If I was in, I'll give you an example because I was overseas and I needed a photocopy of my passport to give to someone over in Paris. I had to go to the United States Embassy in Paris and have them certify the copy because I didn't want to give them my original passport. So I can't take it to a notary public and somebody sign off on it. The United States government prohibits a notary public documentation because a notary public can only notarize things that were issued in the United States under the Geneva Convention. So it has to be certified or the original document. I see Joanna has her hand up. What's up?
I just wanted to clarify something about the name. And I know you can't talk about this, so I'm gonna talk about it. So there's you said that the name, the filing tax name has to match the ITIN application for it to count. For those who are not familiar with what she means with that, it means that if you're using a random social security number or card or fake card or anything like that, to work, you have to be using your real name on that. Because when you file taxes, you have to be filing with your real name. So when you apply for your ITIN, then that matches. Because I know a lot of people work with fake names. You should not work with a fake name. You should work with your real name so you could apply for an ITIN. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. I know Susan
Yes.
can't say it, but
It makes sense.
I can. Thank you.
Thank you. As we continue on, we're going to the next slide. It says when to attach a federal tax return to your W-7 application. Individuals applying for an ITIN for the first time or renewing an existing ITIN must include a U.S. federal tax return unless they meet one of the 5 exceptions. Passive income, third-party withholding, that's pretty much what I was talking about, the bank accounts. There are people here who have tax treaties with other countries and they need it for other income. The one that sticks out in my mind is that you have people who come over to take care of a deceased family member's business in the United States. And like, say for instance, the deceased party had a pension and the payout is going to someone outside the United States and they have to gather that's one of the items that they need an ID number to issue that pension out to the party who lived outside the United States. We talk about mortgages here, mortgage interest. So there are a lot of people who don't necessarily live in the United States, but they do business inside the United States. This is what we talk about here, dispositions of foreign persons of U.S. real property. And this fifth one deals with the requirements of a corporation having to file income statements. There's some additional exceptions that's in the publication 1915 and on the Form W7 instructions. Okay, so we need their tax return, or we need some documentation. And honestly, I think the publication 1915, they give you some examples. They show you how to complete that part of the application and how it's supposed to be coded. Another item that I forgot to talk about when we talk about this income situation is people who tend to come and visit and they do something called gambling inside the United States. They might go to Vegas, they might go somewhere else, Atlantic City. They're gonna want an ID number sometimes. So that's the reason why you gotta have it. As we go on to the next slide, which is are there any questions? All right. I thank you guys for that. Now we're going to talk about, so here we talked about the purpose of the ITIN. Now we're going to talk about the application. Okay. Who needs to fill out one? They have to have a federal tax return. Either way, if you're not doing a tax return or you're getting it for other purposes, you have to have documentation. The acceptable documentation does not change whether it's for a tax return or it's for other purposes. Other purposes, you might have to have some more than this. We call this the baker's dozen. It's 13 acceptable documents. When the ITIN process started in 1996, it was 32 of them. So they've cut them down to 13 of them. Okay. And here, the first one that sticks out is the passport. It says if you submit an original valid passport or a certified copy from the issuing agency, you do not need to submit any other documents unless the passport is for a dependent and it doesn't include a date of entry in the United States. And you probably say, how can that happen? They could obtain their passport, they still have to purchase it, but they could gotten the passport inside the United States. Like in Chicago, we have a matricular consulate, and sometimes they get their passports from them, so they don't have an entry date in the United States. And it says certified copies of a passport must include the U.S. visa pages if the reason for applying are for W7 are boxes F and G. So some items we need the passport as long as that's a dependent is holding a visa. Okay. Proof of U.S. residency for applicants who are dependents. A passport that does not have a date of entry into the United States will not be accepted as a standalone identification document for dependents unless they are from Canada or Mexico or are dependents of U.S. military personnel stationed overseas. In these cases, applicants will be required to submit at least one of the following original documents in addition to a passport to prove their residency. This is where it gets a little, I would say, going between the fine print here. Here's dependents who apply under Reason D, and what they're referring to is on the W-7. Reason D, it says the dependent of a U.S. citizen or resident, and they have to name the person, the relationship to that person, and that person's ITIN number or social security number. Okay, and it says U.S. military personnel stationed overseas or dependent's country of citizenship is not Canada or Mexico will be required to submit additional original documentation beyond the supporting documentation as proof of residency. If it's a person, a child under 6 years of age, they can either submit a U.S. medical record, it's got to be original, U.S. school record, original, U.S. state ID, original, that lists the applicant's name and U.S. address, or a U.S. visa, original. If at least 6 years of age but under 18, they can have the school records again, state ID, driver's license, applicant's name and U.S. address, or the U.S. visa. It means that their information has to match their address. If the person is 18 years of age or older, they still can use a school record, rental statement from a United States property, a utility bill for a U.S. property, or a U.S. bank statement, U.S. state identification card or driver's license that lists the applicant's name in the U.S. address, or a U.S. visa. This only is required if their passport does not have a data entry and they're considered someone's dependent. Okay. Here is some acceptable documentation as we continue on. You can have a United States. Ooh, did I skip one? Okay, I'm sorry. Acceptable documentation, a U.S. citizenship immigration services photo ID, a visa issued by the United States Department of State, a U.S. driver's license, a United States military identification card, a foreign driver's license, a foreign military identification card, a national identification card that must contain the name, photograph, address, date of birth, and expiration date. Everything cannot be expired. It has to be current. Meaning that you got an old driver's license, we're not going to accept it. You got an old state ID card, we're not going to accept it. It has to be unexpired. As we continue on, a U.S. state ID card, a foreign voter's registration card, a civil birth certificate required for dependents under age 18 unless a passport is provided, medical records valid for dependents under 6, school records valid only for dependents under age 18 if a student. It makes a note to look at the instructions and the publication 1915. The 1915 goes into more detail than the instructions. Even though the instructions are like 4 pages back to back, the 1915 gives you a more detail. That's also available on the IRS's website too. Okay, as we continue on. Okay. it says, if you do not have one of the additional documents listed earlier to submit with your passport, you can't use the passport as a standalone supporting document and must submit at least 2 types of documents that prove residency, identity, and foreign status, and that they meet the photo requirement explained earlier. Again, they keep referring you to this publication. This publication is approximately, how many pages is it? Oh, of course, mine doesn't have a number on it. It's about 45 pages. Unfortunately, they're doing it online now. They're not putting it in print. The IRS is going particularly green. So a lot of things are not necessarily available. So you have to go on the website and print it. All right. As we continue on, let's see. Okay, here we go. If a document is in a foreign language, they're going to ask you to attach a certified translation and attach the certified translation and the document in a foreign language to the ITIN application. Certified translations must be attached to the supporting identification document, signed by the official performing the translation, and it has to be sealed. Normally, this is not an upfront requirement. Applicants may be subsequently be requested to provide a certified translation of foreign language document. What I have discovered is if it is in Spanish, they usually do not have any problem with that because they do have assisters in the ITIN unit who are bilingual to take on that. I have not had, I used to be in the walk-in office, or they call it the TAC office, and I haven't seen anything come back saying that we need a certified translation, but certain times they could ask for it. So some people say they rather have the certified translation there and at the beginning of their process to avoid having it come back and be suspended. So as we continue on, we're going to look at some slides here. And here we're looking at things that we would see. These are happens to be copies of 2 birth certificates from Mexico. And then we have another one. They're both from Mexico, but you see they look distinguishedly different. Okay.
I think this one is from El Salvador.
Oh, it is from El Salvador. All right.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we go on to, there are any questions right now? No questions? Okay. Everybody didn't fall asleep on me, did they? Okay. Now, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So we've talked about who needs an ITIN, what they have to do to apply for it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the application process. Okay. So now you're going to submit your ITIN application. Okay. Include the following with your application package: the W-7, your original tax return for which the ITIN is needed. You need to attach the Form W-7 to the front of your tax return. If you're applying for more than one ITIN for the same tax year, such as for the spouse or dependent, you attach all the Forms W-7 to the same return. Original documents or certified copies of these documents from the issuing agency required to support the information provided on the Form W-7. The required supporting documentation must be consistent with the applicant's information provided on the Form W-7. They tell you to refer to the application instructions on renewing an ITIN. So there are several ways that you can submit this application in. You can do it by mail, and that's the address, and that's just regular mail. You can do it by private delivery, and they're providing you the street address, okay? And another way is, we're going to the next slide, and that one, we can skip that one, because that's the addresses. This is the one that comes into mind for our average customer that you might be helping, okay? A lot of people do not want to mail their original documents. They're worried about them being secure. Also, the processing time currently in this filing season is 9 to 11 weeks to be without your document. So the taxpayer can make an appointment to come into what we call a taxpayer assistance center, aka they are known as the walk-in offices. And they can verify the original documents and the certified copies from the issuing agency for all ITIN applicants. For the dependents, the tax office can only verify passports, national ID cards, birth certificates. These documents will be returned to you immediately. Service at the tax is by appointment only. Appointments can be scheduled by calling this telephone number. I think you heard me give that one to Joanne, which is the 1-844-545-5640. Calling that, you tell them what you're here, what you want to do. They normally ask you how many applicants that you have because they have to schedule that accordingly. From what I understand, I spoke to, actually I sent an email to the manager of the office in Indiana, Indianapolis, 575 Pennsylvania Avenue. And he explained to me that their appointment schedule is currently 2 to 3 weeks booked up. That's not bad compared to some offices. Downtown Chicago is 6 weeks up. So, as I said, there's proposed the date for Indianapolis office Saturday service on May 13th. No appointment is needed on that day. So you might want to consider that. As it comes to approach, there's a flyer that normally comes out. I'll send that to Sergio so he can give it out to you guys when it comes available. Another option is to take it to an acceptance agent. An acceptance agent can help you complete and file the Form W-7. There's a list of these acceptance agents under irs.gov here. All right. So then, now the one thing about an acceptance agent is they usually charge. Okay. Another program is the Student Exchange Visitor Program. Major universities have this program, and that office assists from beginning to end. So normally the students, researchers know about this program, and they process those applications and get them to the IRS. And we continue on the next slide. is that, say the person wants to do a couple of things. They want to file an extension to submit their tax return. That gives them another 6 months to file their return. The tax return is due on April 18th this year. It gives them a 6 months extension. It's called automatic extension to file their return. It gives them to October 18th. Or they want to make a payment and they don't have a number. It says if you're filing an application for an extension to file, which is the form 4868, or you're making an estimated tax payment on form 1040 ES, you do not file a W-7 with those forms. You just enter ITIN to be requested wherever the Social Security number ITIN is asking for on that form. An ITIN will be issued only after you file the tax return and meet the other requirements. If you have an address change for your ITIN taxpayer, we advise you to complete the form 8822 or sign letter with the previous and the new addresses and mail it to the Austin Service Center. It's important that the IRS is aware of your mailing addresses, to say that you're trying to get some information and we want to send it to the correct the applicant. So a lot of people, we understand people change their addresses. We want to make sure that we have the most accurate information for the person, okay? This talks about here, ITIN is processing a new ITIN application. Okay, it tells you what happens after you get your application processed. You get a letter known as the CP 565. Now, remember we talked about a green card and I told you the green card is not green anymore? This letter is actually green. And it tells them their assignment number. If they photocopy the letter, it'll have the message, do not photocopy on it. It comes out on it. It's one time and one time only. We ask you to secure it somewhere, okay? Previously, during the ITIN, they used to give them a card. It looked like a Social Security card, but it was green in color. They stopped doing that because it was creating so much confusion. So once they get the, what we call, you know how they say golden ticket, you get the green letter, that means you have an ITIN. What happens is that they take that ITIN number and they put it on the tax return that you applied with your application and process your return. So that's the reason why the processing time is 9 to 11 weeks. So as we continue on, we talk about the processing time. Okay, normally it's 7 weeks. Now it's 9 to 11 because you're doing in the filing season. Okay. It says if you haven't received the application, the ITIN, that's the letter, or correspondence at the end of the time, you can call IRS to find out the status of the application. Okay. So I'll just give you a scenario. Sergio walks into the Internal Revenue Service in Indy. He submits that application for an ITIN with the tax return. We've seen Sergio's ID. Sergio came in with his passport. I'm going to be the assistant in Indy. And I reviewed his application. I verified passport information was correct. I returned Sergio's application, I returned his passport to him. I don't keep his passport because I saw it. And I take the application, his W-7, his tax return. I give him a photocopy of the application, also with the front page of his tax return date stamp. We also make sure you sign everything. because it can't be processed without a signature. And I provide Sergio with what is called what's going to happen next. And there are 3 possible things that could happen. The one we always hope for is that the application is eligible to be processed, and then Sergio will get the letter, the green letter, as I call it. Or this could be a possibility that his application is suspended because there's either something on that application that we need additional clarification. So we'll send Sergio a letter, and that's a suspense letter. And then the third one is we hope never happens is where the application is completely rejected. And then the person has to start the process over. And they will explain to you why the application is rejected. So let's take that scenario number 2, that it was suspended. There's a time frame. They have 45 days to resolve that problem. If they don't resolve it in the 45 days, it becomes a reject. And then they have to start the process entirely over. What's going to happen is that they're going to process that tax return and assign you a number, but it's going to be called an IRS number. And it's just so we can process the return. What could possibly happen if the person is entitled to some credits? They're not going to get them until we get that information back. So when we brief the individuals in the tax office, we tell them what we want to happen. We all want the applications to get processed. So we give you that information. If you have any questions, they entertain them there. There's a toll-free line, and we all know about toll-free lines, how long, Only thing I can always advise people is that if you call the Internal Revenue Service, call early in the morning. So if they open at 7 o'clock, be on the line at 6:50. People laugh when I say that, but that's the way to get in, because you're like in the first set of calls coming through. Also, too, the call lines are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We tell people often call later in the day, maybe start at 5 o'clock. That's because a lot of the Eastern Seaboard would be off the lines, and you would probably get through because of the call volume. So it's either extremely early in the morning or late in the evening. So as we continue on, the next slide are questions. Does anybody have any questions? Seeing in the chat, Sergio?
I don't see any in the chat.
Okay. Now, we talked about that other option of the acceptance agents, and we have a certified acceptance agent. Now, they charge a fee. And unfortunately, the IRS does not regulate those fees. The certified acceptance agency has a lot of responsibilities, okay? Because they're pretty much doing similar work than what the IRS employees do in a walk-in office. So you can seek their assistance, but as I stated, they charge a fee, except they have what we call a certified acceptance agent that happens to be also a spec partner. That's meaning that you've gone to a VITA site and they help do returns, and they also assist with W-7 and the ITIN applications. They have the same guidelines, but one, they cannot charge a fee. Okay. They also could picture this. You come in there for your W-7 application and say you don't have your tax return done or prepared. The VITA site can prepare that return for you free of charge, help you with preparation of your application free of charge, get that application and that return together, and send it on for processing, all free of charge. Okay. That's pretty much what this app line, the next slide is talking about. And as we continue on to the next slide, how to become an agent. Currently, they are not accepting any applications right now. They had a moratorium since August of 2022. They're revamping that acceptance agents program right now. So right now, whoever is an acceptance agent now is what's going on. People can become acceptance agents, but that process won't start until August of 2023. So and they talk about here how to become one, but the procedures are going to change. So we're going to skip all that. Okay. And we're going to talk about what we call an ITIN social security number mismatch. Okay. And kind of similar what Joanne was speaking of, but say when you come in to have your return prepared anywhere, and this is the year after you get your ITIN number should be what's on your tax return. You can do what we call software, use software. What you will do is they should input your name and your ITIN number. But say you work and you have what I call a social security number that doesn't necessarily, we'll just put it, is undocumented. And they need to put that in when they put in the income statement. That's what we call a mismatch. It's not to fear, it's just what we call a mismatch. And they will still process the return. Unfortunately, those taxpayers, as it states here, are not eligible for the earned income tax credit. They're not eligible for the child tax credit, and they're not available for the additional child tax credit. As it indicates, if they have an ITIN number, but they worked under a social, they still can file electronically. So without further ado, we got this summary here and I'll just run through it. The W-7 is used to apply for an individual taxpayer ID number. Our numbers, we can tell it's an ITIN based on the 9 in the beginning, and in the middle, it will vary in between 50 to 65. That's the middle, the 4th and the 5th digit, 70 to 88, 90 to 92, or 94 to 99. When the applications first started, it was only 78, 79 in the middle. And now it's gone, it's increased. Okay, the ITIN is only for federal tax purposes. It talks about the requirements of any resident or non-resident who's required to file a return, or it can be claimed as a dependent and doesn't qualify for a social security number. If they do qualify for a social security number, then they should obtain that social security number. Then it talks about only residents of the US, Canada, India, Mexico, or South Korea may claim an exemption for their spouses or dependents. Tells you about what the law is saying here. Right now, 0 is the credit you'll get. And ITIN does not alter the immigration status. It does not give you authority to work in the US. And it doesn't entitle the applicant for any social security benefits. It doesn't qualify the individual for earned income tax credit, which is refundable. The children with an ITIN do not qualify for earned income tax, nor the child and additional tax credit. However, they may qualify for the other dependent credit if they reside in the United States. And here inside this PowerPoint are interactive. If you click on those items, it will take you directly to the information. And at this time, do we have any other questions? No? Any other questions about the Internal Revenue Service? Besides ITIN, that I can try to assist? Oh, we're so quiet.
We are very shy.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
We are shy.
Oh, don't be shy. Okay. Now, on that note, I want to thank everybody for their attention, asking those important questions. Should you have any additional questions, you can refer them to Sergio, or Sergio, you can provide them my email address if they have additional
Okay,
questions.
let me stop the recording because someone is requesting me to do that. I think there's not a question, but a comment.
Okay,
Let me stop recording.
all right.